Who is really at fault here if we all appeal to the nanny state and then basically demand that they steal from others and hand out scraps? We get the system we deserve and we get the system we vote for. I don't have a lot of sympathy for the plight of the American underclass when the American underclass continues to put itself in this position. I mean, just as one example, you take a look at the the situation that you have with Black Americans that overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. But why do they vote overwhelmingly for Democrats? Remember, it was the Republican Party that championed civil rights. So exactly. And by the way, Robert Byrd was a former Grand Wizard of the KKK. Now, how do you cast a ballot for a political party that has a former Grand Wizard of the KKK as one of its eldest members? The absolute insanity that is found in our electorate just defies any kind of logical explanation, but it leads to the sort of outcomes that we have.
Okay, well, given that we've got collapse coming, we've got a klepto-plutocratic financial oligarchy that are running things, crony capitalism isn't going to be stopped. I think we better move along and address something that everybody's going to need, and that's getting ready for what's coming up next. Preps, being prepared for what's coming. Given the high and increasing levels of uncertainty in the world today, we'd like to get your perspective on being prepared for an increasingly uncertain future. Since you don't seem to believe in precious metals, what other types of preparations do you think that the average person should be making right now, and what would be your order of the priority of these for these preparations?
I wrote a ticker some time ago called 10 Things You Must Do Now. I don't have much to add to it. I'll kind of go down the quick list. You can look up the ticker itself if you want to see the exhaustive detail. The very first thing is to get away from any kind of obligation to other people in the financial realm that can be yanked out from under you. As I was mentioning before, any kind of short-term credit. Get out of any debt that you're able to get out from. And for God's sakes, don't take on any more that can get called or that is non-dischargeable. And for those of you that are young that are listening to this, that means specifically student loans. Okay? I know you don't want to hear this, but borrowing $100,000 to go to college that cannot be discharged in a bankruptcy is the dumbest thing you could ever do. It will turn you into a slave if things go badly for you. So that's number one. The second is figure out what you're going to do in terms of how you will make enough money to survive in whatever form money is if all of the support structures that we have today go straight down the toilet. And that means being prepared both physically and mentally. If you're one of those people that likes to sit on the couch all day, it's time to put on a pair of running shoes and go do something about that. Because if you're not able to get out there and actually physically work, you're going to have some problems. If you live in a big city, figure out what you're going to do about this if we start to see massive and widespread civil unrest. You'll likely get some warnings if that occurs, but figure out how you're going to deal with it. It is a much more difficult problem to solve if you live in a big city than if you live out in the suburbs somewhere. And then on top of that, there's just personal preparation. There is having a means of being able to come up with enough water to drink that is clean. By the way, I don't expect massive disruption of basic utility services. If things get that bad, then the only assets that probably are meaningful are guns. Okay? I don't think it's going to get that bad, but the short-term disruptions in those kinds of utility services are very possible. Remember, a great deal of the world does not have 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week electricity that's on all the time, nor if they did have it, could they afford it. So think about what you're going to do if, for example, we today live under this realm where that is a given, and therefore almost all of our foodstuffs require refrigeration. Do you have a plan put together that if your power is only on 8 or 10 hours out of the day or 4 hours out of the day, that you're going to be able to make that work? By the way, that means all your refrigerated stuff goes in the trash can. Okay, so do you have something? Do you have some way to deal with that problem? And then the other thing is figure out who you can trust and who you can't. People are far more important than things in a situation like this. You look at what happened during, right after Katrina, and if you were in the wrong part of New Orleans, it was a mob scene. People were attacked and brutalized in the Superdome. Okay, and then there were other parts of the town where people looked out for each other and they kept most of the thugs away. Not all of them. You're not going to be 100% successful, but it's better than nothing. Likewise, when there were the riots out in L.A., you had some of the shopkeepers that stood their ground, got their shotguns out, and said, "You're not burning my store." Some of them succeeded, some of them failed, but it is a darn sight better than just saying, "Oops, I don't have any friends." Okay? And some of the people that you count as friends really aren't. You need to take stock of who it is you can trust and who you can't, and how you're going to form into some kind of community organization. People will be much more important than things if the situation really gets dicey.
Okay, so are there any special kinds of preparations that you would recommend for somebody who has a lot of money?
Yeah, I think you want enough land that is arable. Meaning you can grow food crops on it, a water source, and the ability to generate enough power independently for at least a short term. I have personally put together off-grid systems for associates of mine in the past. They weren't in view of impending catastrophe or nuclear war or whatever have you, but just because where they purchased their land was so far away from the electrical grid that it was impractical for them to tie to it from a standpoint of cost. You have to realize that these kinds of preparations will get you through a relatively moderate period of time, months rather than years, certainly days and weeks, probably months, maybe a couple of years, 10, 15, 20 years on a permanent basis. No, if we don't have, the expectation is that some form of society will reorganize after an event like this. But certainly, if you have the funds available to you to purchase enough land that has the ability to be self-sustaining, you can have a few chickens, a couple of goats. There's milk, there's meat, there's eggs, and the ability to grow enough vegetables and other food crops to be able to feed yourself, your family, and those people that you trust. That's a huge advantage. I mean, what good is all the money in the world if you can't spend it on anything? First order of survival is just that, survival.
Okay. Why is it that you don't see either gold or silver as being alternative currencies, even despite their long historical record of being treated as money in the past, assuming that the dollar collapses?
My assumption is that if we have first off, if we have a dollar collapse, okay, I'm not talking about the dollar depreciating by 10 or 20%. I'm talking about, the kind of situation I was talking about earlier where there's a monetary accident and the dollar goes from 70 on the DX to 7. Essentially, for all intents and purposes, goes to 0. If that sort of a thing happens, my assumption is that the government will fail at the same time. The immediate question that you will have to answer then is whatever comes next, what is the first act that whatever governmental order attempts to establish itself next will do? And the short answer is confiscate everything of value from the population through whatever means they're able. In the 1930s, FDR, of course, attempted to confiscate everybody's gold through executive order. He didn't get very far with it, but that was, he locked it up for all intents and purposes because it was illegal for American citizens to own it other than in jewelry. And as a result, if you happen to have a huge stash of gold coins, and they weren't in a safe deposit box because he threatened to seize them if you actually went there. But let's say that you had them in a safe in your house. They were of no value to you whatsoever. You had all these gold coins, but you couldn't do anything with them until the 1970s because it was illegal for you to take them out and exchange them back into currency. So how are you going to trade them for something? I mean, sure, you protected your wealth 40 years later. I'm in my 40s. I'm probably going to be dead before I could trade them back into something if we had a similar event happen. But far more likely is that the government will levy some kind of a conversion tax that amounts to a very high capital gains tax and essentially confiscate all the money anyway. So I look at the monetary metals as excellent speculative tools. A lot of people read my tickers and on the forum in the public areas, and they get the impression that I am very strongly anti-gold and anti-silver. If you're actually a gold subscriber on my website and you're a donor in the system, I put videos out, and I have several times called excellent buying opportunities in the monetary metals. I think silver at the present point is in a parabolic move, and it's likely to collapse. And I'm actually looking for an opportunity to short it, although I wouldn't do it right here because shorting parabolic moves is a good way to lose everything you have. But at some point it will break down. Parabolic moves essentially always do. You can look back at various charts throughout history. You'll see that they almost never end in a way that's pleasant to the people who get in late. So if I was a large holder of metal at this point, I would probably be looking to diversify out of that, or at least buy some protection. The biggest problem I have with it as a physical trade is the insane amount of premium that gets charged on both sides of the transaction. I loathe people that seem to think that paying 5, 10, 6%, 7%, whatever as a premium above spot on both sides of a transaction is reasonable. That's theft, and yet that's the way the bullion market works. So I mean, if you want to deal in coins, that's what you're dealing with. I just can't see the logic in it.
Okay. Our member Thor has another question that's kind of related, and maybe you've addressed it, but I'll let him ask it, and you can repeat your answer if necessary. Thor?
Can you elaborate on the risks of capital asset controls and seizure of precious metals, and how can we mitigate those risks?
Well, I don't think the government's going to actually come and seize your gold because, unlike today, it's not considered part of the monetary base, at least not officially, although the Federal Reserve at least allegedly holds a great deal of it. The problem that I see coming is, and you've already seen this from Barack Obama and others on the Democratic side of the aisle, they're talking about raising taxes. And one of the places they are almost certain to go if their populism manages to win the day in 2012 and beyond is to get extraordinarily punitive with anything related to capital gains. That sort of a move will almost certainly mark my end as a trader, because I am certainly not going to work my butt off trading the markets and keep 10 cents of every dollar I make from a 90% capital gains tax. But the idea that they would exempt precious metals from such a tax is ludicrous. They most certainly will not. And so, that's where the primary problem there comes from. If you're truly wealthy, it's not a bad idea to diversify your assets across national boundaries. But when I say truly wealthy, I mean people that have FU money, that can literally decide to leave the United States and never come back. That is an option for the people that are truly rich. They can do that. You can buy citizenship in an awful lot of countries if you have $1 million or more that you're willing to put into their local economies. And the challenge there is that what you are betting on with such a move is that you're going to be better off there, and that the United States collapsing will not take down that foreign nation. That is a terrible gamble, and if you lose that bet, you're going to get eaten, because you're going to be the gringo that caused the mess. And that's exactly how the people in that nation are going to look at it. You're the outsider. You brought the plague, okay? And you know what happened to people in the Middle Ages that were seen as being the source of the plague. So I am, as somebody of reasonable means, but not dirty, stinking Bill